First one of the day. This is the two Selke Trophy centers we were talking about on Monday, Barkov and Reinhart. Meanwhile, the Panthers just possessed the puck 41.5% of the time with him on the ice and 38.9% with Reinhart on the ice. Doesn't seem like they're getting a lot of defense and takeaways against those Edmonton big guns. A team like the Florida Panthers, especially face-off-wise and defensively, the way they are able to stick handle should be able to get them out of the zone a lot faster. They were not able to do that on that end. And then it leads me to the second part of the six-pack as well. Leon Draisaitl on the other extreme. 67% of the time he was on the ice. They had the puck and 60.6 in the offensive zone alone, which leads me to believe that either the line combinations were not working with Paul Maurice as much as they probably should have, or the Rangers ex-head coach Chris Knobloch did not do as well did a great job in terms of getting those matchups to keep them off the ice in the matchups that they get them off the ice against those two Selke Trophy guys, which is something that the Rangers did not do very well last year with their centers, and that's why Mika Zibanejad had those awful postseason stuff like that. But Knobloch was able to do it with his stars and all of the other depth pieces that we were mentioning.
Well, Draisaitl hasn't had a really good playoff run. He's one of the best offensive players over the last 10 years. If you look at his numbers, they're comparable to Mario Lemieux. If you go look at the top 10 offensive players in NHL history, Draisaitl's up there. Throughout the playoffs, he's been up and down. Now, I said that Draisaitl could really take off in this series, and you're seeing it right now. I think Draisaitl is one of the best offensive players in the league. You see what he did in game number one, and I wasn't surprised when it went to overtime that Edmonton was going to pull it out. When you have guys like Connor McDavid and Draisaitl doing what they have done over the last couple of years. As a matter of fact, I don't know the numbers, so don't quote me on this. Edmonton, when they go into overtime, they've won most of the majority of their games in the playoffs when they go to overtime. I think their statistic, and again, don't quote me on this, it's got to be over 75%. It's got to be.
And it's the most that they've won in a single postseason already with overtime games. There's actually been 21 overtime games in this span, which is already on pace to be a record as well in a single postseason. This is one positive one for Florida. Sam Bennett had just under 23 minutes of ice time and scored 2 goals on 40% of his shots. And then on the Oilers' end, 16 more shot attempts with both Connor McDavid and Evan Bouchard on the ice at the same time.
When you have the McDavid lines on there, especially when they're on the power play, and Speedy, they lost in overtime because they gave up a power play to the most lethal, absolutely destructive force that the NHL has seen for a number of years. You can't do that against this team, and they thought maybe they'd get away with it at the end of the first overtime, and sure enough, just great passing, great puck movement. You can't stop it when the guy who's finishing is Draisaitl. By the way, Draisaitl, the most goals, most points for any German-born player of all time.
By a long shot.
He's the best German player ever. By the time Draisaitl walks away from the NHL, he's going to probably score close to 600 and some odd goals. He's going to be comparable to the Jaromir Jagrs of the world, because Jaromir Jagr was really Mario Lemieux's Robin. That's what he was. And even when Mario Lemieux walked away from hockey and Jaromir Jagr jumped from one team to another, he was like the Robin on every other team that he played for.
On the Panthers end, on the losing side, 3 seasons with Paul Maurice, the Panthers were 31-0, where they either had a first or second period lead up until this game 1, where they blew a 3-1 lead at the end of or 3-2 lead at the end of the second period. And on the Oilers end, they have 7 come from behind wins, almost doubling the next highest team for a single postseason. So they actually broke the record that the Kings had, the 2014 Kings that beat the Rangers. They broke that record earlier this postseason, and now they've just cemented it even more, which means they likely maybe could even double it. They could get 8, they could get 9 even at the point if it comes down to it, because Florida, we've talked about, they have a good playoff identity because they really know how to play when they're ahead. And that's something that the Rangers had trouble with last year. That's something that Carolina definitely had trouble with in both the times they ended up losing to them. So Florida is very good at sitting on a lead, probably more than a lot of teams we've seen in the past. And just Edmonton is the other extreme. I compared it when we were talking about the Stanley Cup when they beat the Stars. They're like the Florida Gators of the NHL. They kept finding weird ways to win this game.
They have 2 of the top 3 best players in all of hockey in the world on their team, on their roster, and that's why Connor McDavid is by far the best player in the world. And then you have Draisaitl. You can argue At one point, maybe 3 years ago, some people compared him as the number 2 guy on the same roster. But you could argue 3 or 4. He's 3rd or 4th right now in the NHL. And Draisaitl, to me, is more potent in the playoffs than McDavid. And if they get Draisaitl to play like he did yesterday, the Florida Panthers, as good as they are and how stacked as they are, they're not beating Edmonton because those guys are just so much better than everybody else.
Tyus Ekholm was so close to the game-winning goal. They just had to defend well enough just to stop him, and then obviously Stars took over.
You talked about Barkov,
and
you talked about Reinhart, you talk about Marchand, you talk about all these guys, Kachuk, all these great players on the team. You look at those guys, and you look at Draisaitl, McDavid. If you ask any GM, I guarantee you every single GM would take those 2 guys over those 5 guys.
Yeah, foundations that you could build. We've seen, especially now in today's game, we've seen a lot of teams win with either randomly new goaltending.
They have no goaltending. I don't want to hear Skinner as a good goalie. He stinks.
That's what I'm saying. Vegas won with Adin Hill, and they rotated 4 different guys all year. Pittsburgh won with Matt Murray. So there's definitely a way that you can make that kind of system work in today's game where you either have a goalie by platoon or just goalies that they don't feel as much pressure as it was, too. Even the Blues with Binnington, as much as you hate him, that was very random, too, because Jake Allen got hurt that season. So they were trying to make that system work, and Chris Knobloch deserves a lot of credit for that.